Hi, everyone. Thanks a lot for joining us tonight. My name's Kelly Heffer and I work at Hume City Council. So tonight's session is all about improving comfort for renters and saving on bills, including through the proposed higher energy efficiency standards. So from the outset, I'd just like to acknowledge that I'm on the land of the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people of the Eastern Kulin Nation and pay my respects to elders past, present and future. So this session's been jointly programmed by the City of Hume, Merri-bek, Moonee Valley and Yarra. It's all part of our efforts to shift to more energy efficient homes, especially ones that are all electric, powered by renewables and fit for future climate conditions as well. So tonight we'll hear from Dean Lombard, who's from Renew, who are a not-for-profit organisation that we're working with. They provide advice and advocacy for sustainable homes. And then there'll be time for your questions at the end. So now just to introduce our speaker. So Dean Lombard is a former social worker and an energy specialist who's worked for many years with Renew and other non-profit environmental and community service organisations. He's worked to change policies and regulations to better support households in the energy system. He's really passionate about helping people and communities take control of their energy needs and make the system best work for them. So I'll hand over to you, Dean.
Thanks a lot, Kelly, and everyone else involved in putting this on. And thanks everyone for coming. It's great to have people interested in these topics and to have the opportunity to share this sort of info with you. I'm coming to you from the land of the Bunurong and Wurundjeri people in West Footscray. I'll give you a bit of an outline of what I'm going to do. So this is aimed at giving renters more information and maybe some tools and resources to be more comfortable in their homes, but also to understand about what's changing in rental regulations and what that will mean. So what I do in this presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about energy usage in the home, because that really, being comfortable in your home is basically about having the right appliances to keep the temperature and conditions comfortable. And that means using energy of some kind usually, and the amount that you use. And the effectiveness of it depends on stuff with the house, stuff with the appliances. So bit of a quick rundown on energy usage in the home generally. Then we'll look at thermal performance, which is basically how the house operates to keep temperatures inside comfortable, no matter what's outside. Then we'll look into the rental quality standards, because they're really focused on, I guess, the thermal performance of the house as well as the appliances used for heating and cooling. And then we'll look at stuff that you can do as renters to improve your comfort. And then we'll look at other related stuff as well. So that's the outline. Energy usage in the home. Energy is that thing where we don't really know much about how we use it generally. We know how much we pay for it when our bill comes. We know that we need it when we want to turn on an appliance, but we often don't really know how much appliances are used for different things. And this chart here is sort of an average Melbourne home and what proportion of its total energy use is used for these different functions. And I think this is good to understand because, if you're trying to save money on energy, use energy more effectively, you want to think about what are the biggest usages and how can you improve the way that you use those. So of course, this is an average. It varies a lot according to the types of appliances you have and the climate and the weather patterns as well as your lifestyle. But generally speaking, like nearly half your energy that you use in a year in Melbourne is used for heating, because we're actually a relatively cold climate most of the time. Not that much for cooling, but it's still significant. The next biggest chunk is hot water, which is like nearly 30%. That varies a lot depending on what sort of hot water appliance you have, and we'll be touching on those appliances a bit later. Cooking, not very much. Fridge, also not very much, but they, both of those are more than the smaller stuff like lighting. So I often like to emphasize fridges do use, this is like a good fridge, a bit less than 5%, but a bad fridge, like an old inefficient fridge, can use 2 or 3 times that much. And fridges are one of the one of the most effective ways that people can improve their energy usage in the home without looking at heating and hot water, get a more efficient fridge. Really old fridges use a lot more than modern efficient fridges. But for the purposes of this, we're really going to be focusing on hot water and heating because they are the ones that most affect energy usage, and that heating and cooling most affects how comfortable you are. I also like to remind people that your electricity and gas bills have really useful information on them. And one of the useful ones is this little chart here that usually shows your bill amount or your energy usage over the last several bills. This is actually, I think, a South Australia bill, which has quarterly bills, but we normally have monthly bills in Victoria. So you'd like 12 of these bars showing your usage for each month of the year. That's a good way to see where you use most of your energy. This household uses most of their energy in sort of late spring, early summer. They've probably got a lot of cooling. That's South Australia. That will be. You might find in Melbourne, if you've got gas heating, that you use your most gas in winter, and you might use your most electricity in summer. It's useful to know that and to see what your energy usage is per day in kilowatt hours and how that compares with the average, with the average for the number of people. Because this is what the average per number of people would be for your usage, and it's good to compare what you're doing with others because it just shows you if you've got an opportunity to save a lot of energy or just a little. And the Energy Made Easy website, .gov.au, basically this has got a really good and pretty easy to use comparison of home energy usage. You type in your postcode, how many people in your house, and it'll basically tell you, people in your area with the same number of people, this is how much electricity or gas they use. And that can give you a bit of more of a clue as to whether you're using a typical amount of energy or less or more. And if you're using a lot more, that's when you probably know that there's probably something you might be able to do to use less. The other useful thing to do is to go to Victorian Energy Compare website and type in your info, and it'll find the cheapest energy offer for you, the cheapest energy retailer, because different retailers charge different amounts just for the same electricity. There's no difference. It's all a bit of a scam, really, but this helps you find the cheaper ones. The whole industry is designed to trick you into paying more than you need to. So this website helps you get around that. Anyway, that's the basics. Thermal performance. I like to say the house is like our biggest appliance. The house is a appliance designed to keep you comfortable and to keep all your stuff out of the weather. And look, a good principle for the thermal performance of housing, for anything really to do with comfort and temperature, is that heat goes to anything that's colder than it. That's why when you put, warm cans in an esky with ice, the ice melts because the heat from the warm cans goes into the cold ice and melts it. That's actually what makes your drinks cold. But that's a general principle. So in winter, you fill your house full of heat with your heater, and it tries to get out any way it can to the cold air outside. And this is sort of, on average, how much heat is lost through all the different surfaces of your house. You can see that ceiling is the most. That's why ceiling insulation is really important in houses. Walls and windows are also quite a bit. Air leakage, like draught, can be significant in some places. Floor is also significant, but to a bit of a lesser extent. So yeah, ceiling insulation is really important. Unfortunately, as a renter, you can't really do much about that unless your house already has it. I've known some people who've had a chat to their landlord and got them to install insulation. Other people don't want to sort of bring it up because they're sort of trying to keep a low profile. We're all in different situations. It's always worth sticking your head up in the little access hatch in your ceiling to see what sort of insulation is in the ceiling, just so that you know what you've got. And then you could, if you feel comfortable to talk to your landlord, you could talk to them and say, maybe some ceiling insulation would be a great idea. That may be changing. I'm going to touch on some of the new incoming sort of rental laws a bit later on, and one of them has got something to do with insulation. But the main message from this is, if you can't do anything about insulation, then focus on windows and walls to a lesser extent. But when you're a renter, windows is probably the most effective thing that you can do. In summer, it's pretty much the same areas, and in summer it's the opposite. The hot air outside, once you get into your house, you might be trying to cool it. You might not have a cooler, but your house is probably still a bit cooler inside at the start of the day, and the hot air tries to get inside. And again, it comes in from the same ways. Again, the windows are really important. Ceiling is also really important. I like to show this picture just to illustrate the thing about windows, because this is a picture we're taken with a thermal camera, which sort of photographs heat. And in this picture, the red bits are hotter and the green and blue bits are colder. This is winter. This house has ceiling insulation. So you can see that heat's not coming out through the ceiling because it's insulated, but the heat inside the house is coming out through all the windows and the doors and the garage door. And that's just a good example of, almost the more, windows is one of the most important parts of this, because even if you've got great ceiling insulation, windows then become the weakest point. It's the thinnest part of the house. It's where you're most likely to lose heat. And good window coverings make a really big difference. And we're going to talk about window coverings in a little bit, but that's just to make the point. And then I show this chart just because this shows what a difference it makes to have a house perform thermally properly. 3-star is your typical house built before 2000. A 6-star and 7-star are houses built in the last sort of 10 years. 7-star is the current standard for new homes. And these are all ratings of what the thermal performance of a house is like, how good the insulation is basically. And this just shows how much less energy a house that performs well thermally, a house with good insulation, like 6 and 7-star has good insulation, that's how much less energy they need to heat and cool the exact same size house compared to one that hasn't got good insulation. This is the sort of difference it makes. So if you're in a newer house, you've probably already got some of these benefits. If you owned a house, then this would show why it would be really important to add thermal improvements to it. And if you're renting a more than 20 years old house like I am, this shows you how far behind the 8 ball we are, because we don't have the authority to go and add ceiling insulation and, fix up drafts and walls and windows. And this is actually the background to one of the reasons why we've been having these changes in rental regulations lately to improve quality. And that's what I'm going to talk about next. Because until a few years ago, there were no quality standards at all for rental houses. In fact, the only thing a rental house had to have to be legally able to be rented out was a smoke alarm. You could rent out a house without glass in the windows, without a lock on the door, with no ceiling insulation, without running water, without a toilet. As long as it had a smoke alarm, you could rent it out. That's a huge oversight of regulation for decades in Victoria, and that was addressed a few years ago because of these issues, because it was known that health, safety, utilities costs were problems for tenants, and that most owners of rental properties didn't take up government schemes that gave them discount upgrades such as free ceiling insulation. And we also found out from research that we did that the quality of the house didn't really have any bearing on the rent that was being asked for it, except at the very high end of the market. In the same area, in the same street, there'd be a house in really poor condition and a house in good condition going for the same price. So the market wasn't working. So this is, I think, one reason why these standards came in. And the other one is that, as Kelly sort of mentioned earlier, there's this longer term thing happening right now where the gas network is declining, gas is running out, becoming expensive. Efficient electric appliances are much cheaper, and we're actually moving towards a world where we don't really have many gas appliances and where most houses will have electric appliances. And the rental standards also, part of them is to sort of basically ensure that rental houses also upgrade their appliances to efficient electric rather than stay on the gas network, which will ultimately cost people more money. So these are, I think, the standards that came in a few years ago, most relevant to energy and energy usage and basic comfort. So there's a standard for shower heads, and electrical switchboards have to be modern types with circuit breakers and safety switches. Structural soundness was a bit of a vague one, but no major drafts basically. Window coverings required on all bedrooms and living rooms. A fixed heater in the main living area, and look, all of these came, apart from the switchboards, which just came in slap bang at that time, all of them have to be complied with at the point of a new lease being signed, or a lease or a fixed term lease being converted to a periodic lease. So after these dates, these changes have to be done whenever that happens. So basically, after March last year, any new lease or any conversion of a existing lease to a periodic lease, the heater in the living area has to be at least 2-star efficiency. So they're the main ones that cover energy and water usage. There's a bunch of other standards about what should be in bathrooms, kitchens, lighting, locks, it's actually good to look at. Consumer Affairs Victoria website. You can go do a quick search on their website for rental standards and you'll find them. Has much more information if you're interested. And there's a few exemptions for apartments and heritage properties, but generally speaking, there's a bunch of standards that now apply to pretty much all houses. And it's good to check out what they are. The big question is who ensures that standards are met? And unfortunately, the way the system was introduced was, well, really the only way is for tenants to say, hey, my house doesn't meet the standard. You know, property managers are supposed to advise owners that they don't comply, but as we know, they don't always do a great job and they don't always do stuff like this. So in the end, it's actually been left to tenants to address compliance, which is unfortunate, and hopefully that's changing. Look, there's some great advice on Tenants Victoria website about what to do if your house doesn't meet standards. You can also report non-compliant ones to Consumer Affairs Victoria, and you can report that anonymously, so you don't have to, your landlord doesn't have to know that you made the report. So having that anonymous report form is actually a bit of an improvement. But there's been some changes just announced, and this was actually just announced today. And these are future changes coming in. And one of them is that properties will be required to meet the standards when they're advertised and not at the start of a tenancy. And as part of that also, part of the same changes, property managers and real estate agents will need to have mandatory training and licensing. So I think that's probably designed to try and ensure the standards are actually met properly at the time of advertising. So that's good for tenants. We won't have to do the heavy lifting. They've brought in these big fines for property owners who don't meet the standards. They've also brought in this one, it's not really related to standards, but I thought you'd be interested. They're changing the rent review process. If a tenant can initiate a rent review if they get a rent increase that they think is too much. And this new thing they're bringing in will actually give Consumer Affairs Victoria the power to consider the size of the rent increase and whether repairs are being made when deciding if it's valid, because they couldn't do that before. The other thing that's good to know with the current standards is that, as well as the standards, there came into a list of stuff that tenants were permitted to do themselves to the house without permission, at their own cost, and with a requirement to sort of rectify it when they move out, unless the landlord agrees for them not to. But before this, there were really no rights for any tenant to do anything to the house. And the ones that are relevant to energy usage, I've sort of marked here. Window film that can help to improve the thermal performance of windows. Curtains, if the curtains in the house are not very thick, therefore they don't work very well to sort of stop heat transfer, you can get thicker curtains and replace them as long as you keep the old curtains. You're allowed to install LED light bulbs, and you're allowed to install shower heads yourself or get someone to install them as long as you keep the original ones. And that saves water, which saves hot water. There's other stuff too, pitch hooks and screws. Got a lot of people excited. Child safety locks, all this info is on the Consumer Affairs Victoria website to have a look at. There's also a whole lot of other changes that you can only do with permission, but for all of these, the owner is required to give permission unless they have a good reason not to, and that will be decided by the rental tribunal. So that includes doing stuff to block up drafts, including weather seals or caulking, with a silicone gun sort of thing. And it's got this sort of catch-all, make sure the renter is not too hot or cold, or to reduce energy water bills. Not sure what those might be, but basically there's quite a few things that if you ask the landlord, they're required to do it. And, I wonder if ceiling insulation might come into this. If you ask the landlord, then it's if you could have ceiling insulation installed, they would sort of have to agree. You would have to get it installed professionally, but that's probably only an option for if you're going to be in a house for a long time, because it's a bit expensive and has a few years payback. Other stuff here like fly screens. These are big benefits for tenants compared to a few years ago. Now, there's some new standards coming in. They've done the consultation on this. They were supposed to announce them a month ago, but they didn't. That's why all the dates are a bit uncertain. But these are basically some improvements and building on those existing standards. One of them is that from the end of life of existing heating, they'll have to replace it with an electric heater with 2 stars minimum. There's a cooling requirement on a new rental agreement or at the end of life of existing cooling. These October dates, they won't be the right dates because this was supposed to be announced in October, and then they do a year and then 2 years or 3 years from announcement when they have to comply. So it's probably going to be early 2026. That's sort of what I heard when so it's probably going to be announced early next year, and then the requirement will start to come in from early 2026. That means this one will be something probably like early 2028. There's also a ceiling insulation one where a house has no ceiling insulation. And this will, expected to come in early 2026, that where there's no ceiling insulation in a house, the next time the lease is signed or turned to a periodic, the landlord will be required to put ceiling insulation in. That will be great because research done quite a while ago found that nearly 50% of rental houses didn't have any ceiling insulation. So that is a really good one. But these are forthcoming, and these are, this is what they've proposed. They might come out a little bit differently when the whole process is finished, but this is what we expect as a best case scenario. Here's the others: draft proofing, stronger draft proofing rules, requirement to put in electric heat pump or solar hot water at the end of life of the existing hot water, higher standards for shower heads, and blind cord safety anchors. This is because blind cords can sort of choke children. This has just been announced today that has to be done by 1st December next year. All blind cords have to have anchors so that they can't be a choking hazard. So that's basically the rental standards. I know I rushed over that a little bit, but basically it's pretty good news for tenants in general, and it seems like things are slowly changing a bit more in tenants' favour in some of the rental laws. I'm now going to talk about some of the stuff that you can do as a tenant to improve the stuff that affects how your house performs with energy. And I'll sort of make a note when the stuff is stuff that's in those standards, because some of it we can expect to see, the landlord or owners being required to do. I did want to quickly throw this out there. There's this thing called the Residential Efficiency Scorecard. It's basically a household assessment tool where an assessor will come out and look at a house and look at the insulation and the windows and the appliances and basically give a report on how well the house performs in terms of energy usage. Now, this is a really useful thing because if you've got a house that might have lots of issues or you don't know what the issues are, these reports are a good way to identify biggest bang for buck is to do something with this window or whatever. Now, obviously, there's a lot more potential for an owner to make use of this tool than a tenant. But I've had one done as a tenant, and the assessor gave me advice that was based around what I could do as a tenant to improve my energy usage. So I still found it useful. So something to think about, probably if you expect and you're pretty confident that you'll be in a house for some time, because you have to pay for these. Where's that thing with the money? They generally cost about between $250 and $500, which is a bit of money, but you can get a discount through this Victoria Energy Upgrades program, discount of $120, which means it could be a few $100s. Now, if you were going to be in a house, if you knew you were going to be in a house for 3 or 4 years, that might be worth spending to find out what to do to save energy money. That's sort of your call, I guess. I was lucky with mine. I got it for free when the scheme first came out, and they were doing free ones for renters. But yeah, just a thought. The other way to do it is to look at the obvious stuff like, are there drafts? And I'll talk about this in a bit. I wanted to make this note about insulation. I've known some tenants who've attempted to put in their own ceiling insulation. This is really not recommended. It's not a type of modification that tenants are permitted to do. And it's also very inadvisable for anyone without the experience or training, because there are some serious safety issues with installing insulation because of lots of electrical wires, etc., in the ceiling, and has other hazardous materials. And if you were installing with ceiling insulation in your rental house and the installation caused a fire, then that could be pretty bad in lots of ways. So just don't recommend doing it yourself. If you really want to get some movement on insulation, I'd talk to your landlord. I think if you're pretty confident to be in a house for several years, might be even worth cost sharing it with the landlord if that was what you needed to get it over the line, because ceiling insulation can save a lot of money. But yeah, don't try doing it yourself. The most effective things renters can do really is window coverings if your curtains are not very good. And look, you can get special thermal curtains that are designed to, stop heat from passing through. And they're quite expensive, but they work really well. But really, any thick curtain will do the job. And I generally say, if you could use a curtain as a blanket, then it will work well as a thermal curtain. The most important thing is that they cover the window fully. Ideally, they go past each side a bit and they go up and past the top and past the bottom to completely cover the glass in the window, because the glass in the window really conducts heat a lot. And that's what happens. The hot, warm air in your house hits the cold glass, goes straight through. Same thing happens in summer with heat getting into the house, but the effect is even more in winter. So yeah, if the curtains that are in your house are not, are just sort of thin and, the light shines through them and that sort of stuff, you can get thick curtains pretty cheaply from op shops, garage sales and stuff. Hang them yourself because you're permitted to do it without permission, and it can make quite a difference. To get the best difference, you would sort of improvise palmets, which is like a cover that goes over the top of the curtain. I've done them before with pieces of cardboard or core flute, sort of resting on top of the curtain sort of rod, and have a bit stuck on it, go down the front. It just stops this thing that happens. It's on the next slide. There's this whole thing that happens when the warm air in the room sort of goes down between the curtain and the window, and all the heat gets sucked out through the window and the air becomes cold, and then it comes around again at the bottom and creates a cold draft and actually makes you colder. And covering it with a palmet, which is this thing here, actually just stops that whole process and makes a huge difference. And window coverings stop about 40% of the heat loss that would otherwise go through the glass. Palmets reduce that by about another 25%. They're very effective. So you can improvise them, and that's a good thing to do if your curtains are not sort of well set up. You've probably heard of double glazing, which is expensive windows with two bits of glass that have air in between them. And this is a standard in Europe and other cold climates. It's now pretty much required by the modern building code in Australia for new houses. But I thought it was just interesting to point out that this is a study done by Sustainability Victoria a few years ago, and they basically found that thick drapes with palmets save as much energy, almost as much energy as double glazing, for much less cost. So this is just to run the point home. Curtains are really effective at keeping heat inside your house and pretty good at keeping heat outside the house in summer. The other thing is what they call renter's double glazing, which is bubble wrap stuck to the window. This is a photo of my window in my lounge room. I haven't done the palmets in this place. These are relatively thick curtains, but I still used to get this sort of cold air feeling off these windows because it's such a big window. And I tried this thing that had been recommended to me, which is to stick a bubble wrap on the glass, and it makes a heap of difference. It actually cuts down the thermal transfer because it's like it's like double glazing. It creates an air pocket between the room and the glass and keeps warm air in the room separate from the cold glass. It's very easy to put on. You get a spray bottle, spray the water with window, stick the bubble wrap on. Works great, very cheap. Obviously, some people don't like the look of it. For me, this window just looks out onto a fence. I'm not really losing a view. I often have the curtains closed anyway when at nighttime, and it's sort of privacy and works quite well. So that's something to think about if you've got a window that you're okay to sort of get that muted sort of light sort of effect to save some cold. You can also get this film from a hardware store that you stick on the window. You can still see through the window, but it sort of has a thermal quality. They cost a bit. There's different types. They cost different amounts. It's hard to sort of estimate what they would be, but you can look in a hardware store and you'll see them. They are actually a permitted modification for renters under the new rules, but it would set you back a few $100 if you were doing a few windows. That might be worth it, especially if you want the view. But again, windows, really important at thermal performance. Now, this stuff is really mostly for winter. Curtains and that have bit less effective in summer, but they still help. The big thing in summer is actually stopping the sun from hitting the glass in the first place. This chart here just shows the amount of heat that gets through the window per square meter. So it's, this is proportionate to any size window, depending on the window treatment. And you can see here that, for a plain normal glass window, almost 800 watts of heat per square meter comes in when the sun's hitting the window. Double glazing cuts it down by, what's that, 20%, 25% maybe. But drapes are actually more effective than double glazing for keeping the hot out of the house in summer. Double glazing's, like I've said, about as effective as drapes in winter, but drapes work better in summer, and that window film works even better. It's a bit more expensive, but even better than the window film and double glazing is just shading from the outside. Like this is partly shaded and this is fully shaded. Stopping the sun from hitting windows in summer is the number one way to keep your house cooler. That can be a bit tricky for tenants. It depends on what you can do. It's the sort of thing that often is done by the way a house is built, like eaves, or like if there happen to be trees planted outside. And one of the principles here is that the sun is higher in summer than in winter, and well-designed eaves or pergolas like this will be designed to block the sun in summer so that the window's shaded, but to let the light through in winter, because in winter you want the sun shining through the window to warm up the house. If you owned a house, a good way to do it is to put these slatted pergolas with the angle set just right to let the winter sun through, but not the summer sun. As a renter, though, you've got some opportunities to put stuff on the outside of your windows on hot days. Shade cloth or tarpaulins, bamboo or matchstick screens or blinds. I've certainly got a big window at my place here where I attach some shade cloth underneath the eaves and stretch it out to a couple of tent poles in the backyard to make a shaded area. Works quite well. And here's some pictures of some different window treatments. This one is obviously a custom-made sort of shade cloth, but, you can see how effective it is. And you can sort of improvise stuff like this. If you've got, you might be able to stretch it to a fence or to a tree or to a tent pole like I've done. This is a picture of those slats, which you can't really do unless you own a place. If you've got these blinds on your place, and a lot of old places have these work very well. They're quite thick and they have good thermal properties. And this other way of doing it is you can use bulldog clips to clip shade cloth to the guttering, and then you can either hang it down or you can stretch it out, attach it to the top of the fence or to a tent pole. I use tent poles, very useful. And these are the sort of things that you can do as improvised solutions that are sort of not quite as effective as having it done properly, but they will make a big difference. And as that chart showed before, keeping the sun off the windows in summer is the number one thing that you want to do to keep cooler in summer. The other thing that's, again, more of an issue in winter is drafts. And this picture from the Your Home website just shows all the places in a house where you can get drafts. And as you can see, it's pretty much everywhere. You cannot possibly deal with them all, but you can try and identify where the biggest drafts are and work out if you can block them up. Now, as mentioned before, the new rental standards the current rental standards say the house has to be structurally sound, in inverted commas, which probably means no gaping holes, and you get big drafts through gaping holes. The new standard requires draft standing around doors and a few other areas of the house. That will make a big difference. But the other thing in the current standards is that you are permitted to do draft blocking, including installing seals and using caulking to fill gaps with permission, but the owner cannot unreasonably refuse permission. So if you can identify where the biggest gaps are, you could talk to your landlord about it, or you could do stuff that's sort of structural to fix them. A good way to find drafts is on a cold day, walk around the house in bare feet and you'll feel them. Some people use an incense stick or a candle and see which way the flame blows and follow it back the other way, because there shouldn't be a breeze in your house unless there's a draft. But the biggest ones, the ones that are most easy to find and the most common, are sort of under doors and around external door frames, around like where there's holes in the wall for pipes to stick out, or air conditioners like this, along the bottoms of the floors or between floorboards, and around windows. Rugs on floors are great for covering floorboards. For doors, you can get stick-on felt that goes around the door frames, and you can get special door seals that attach to the bottom of the door. But you can also use door snakes, just those sort of rolled up sausage sort of things. They work just as well as a properly fitted draft stopper. They're just a little bit more inconvenient because you got to move them when you open the door. But yeah, they make a big difference. And if you find drafts around windows, that's a good candidate for sort of caulking. And if there's gaps between windows, especially like if you've got an older house, maybe with sash windows, they often have quite a gap between the two parts. And you can actually buy a very thin adhesive felt that you can put at the top edge of the window where the two panes join together, and that can actually be quite effective. I've done that too. It also stops the noise of windows rattling, which actually is a good indicator on a windy day of where you've got a draft, when there's a gap between windows and they sort of go bang, 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 bang together. I mean, ventilation's important in a house anyway. So, if you can't get all the gaps, get the main ones. The ones lower down are probably the most important to get because you feel them more. And, in summer, this is not as big an issue, but it's still a bit of an issue because hot air comes in through the gaps. It's good to think about ventilation as a positive thing as well. In summer, monitor the outside temperature versus the inside temperature. Having a couple of thermometers is good for this because when it gets cool outside, that's when you want to open up some windows and doors, and then the cooler air from outside will come into the house and cool it down. And vice versa, once it starts to get hotter outside, that's when you want to close up doors and windows to keep the cool air in. This thing about thermal mass, look, I just throw this in there. There's nothing you can do about it. Basically, your house will have thermal mass or it won't. Thermal mass is solid, dense material that soaks up heat. And what happens, and it's like a brick wall, slab of concrete, it soaks up the heat, stores it, and then when the air outside it becomes cooler, it then releases the heat out. This is great in winter if you've got a brick wall. Like I've got a wall in my house, it's a brick wall that the sun shines on. It's fantastic, and it's got a big concrete driveway next to it. As soon as the sun goes down, it radiates into the house from that all that thermal mass, all that heat stored in the concrete and brick, and it's great. In summer, it has the opposite problem because it does the same thing. It soaks up the heat and it throws the heat into the house that I'm trying to keep cool. So in summer, I put some shade cloth over it so that it doesn't get direct sun on it, and therefore it doesn't soak up as much heat, and therefore it doesn't make my house as hot. So this is an example of, you can't do much about whether you've got thermal mass or not in annoying places, but have a look around, figure it out. If you've got a thermal mass that gets sun, work out if you can cover it during summer or if you can make use of it during winter to use the heat or to keep the heat, depending on if it's summer or winter. That's the main stuff about thermal performance. I may have missed some stuff. Please do throw questions in the Q&A if there's something you want to know that I didn't say. I want to touch on appliances. Before there was a requirement for heaters in rental homes, a lot of renters had heaters like this because there was no fixed heating in a lot of homes, which seems nuts in Victoria, such a cold climate, but that was the reality. Nowadays, very few people should need to rely on these, especially in the main area, because there's a requirement for a fixed heater in the living room of every rental house. And these are standard types of heating that you might have: a reverse cycle air conditioner, a console gas heater or a wall furnace, the tall ones, or a ducted heater. These all comply with the current rules around heating in rental houses. These gas ones, though, when the new rules come in, these will need to be replaced with some form of electric heating when they reach their end of life. And that's part of sort of the government roadmap towards moving to electrification as gas becomes more expensive and harder to get. But for now, they're all required. And some houses have both, because a lot of places have one of these installed as an air conditioner, as well as one of these as a heater. Good to know is that these reverse cycle air conditioners, if they cool and heat as well, the heating is much cheaper to run than any gas heater because it's much more efficient. It's 400 to 600% efficient compared to 80% efficient for a console heater and as low as 50% efficient for a ducted heating. They actually say, yeah, it costs a lot because they basically extract heat from the air to make the heat that goes in the house. So yeah, absolutely. If you've got one of these, you try using it for heating, you'll probably find that it heats the room as well as one of these, and it'll cost you a lot less. Also low emission. Of course, some big houses have ducted heating and it heats every room, and that's obviously pretty warm and comfortable in winter if it works. These do blow a bit of dust around and cause allergic issues, and they can be pretty expensive to run. So if you've got one of these, see if you can use as much as you can if you're trying to save money on heating. Often people don't like to use these for heating because we're used to these type of electric heaters that are very expensive to run. These are much cheaper to run. These use far less electricity than these. If you've got these, and especially if you've got a house where the main room heating doesn't get to, you might be stuck with using some of these. Keep in mind that they are expensive to run, and use them, minimize your use to when you really need it and get the most value from it. This is the price example, just because sometimes people don't believe me. This is the cost comparison of doing the same amount of heating with a gas heater versus a relatively not particularly efficient reverse cycle air conditioner. It's less than half the cost. And this is 450% efficient. It's actually not a very good one. It's like probably a 10-year-old one or something. So it's much cheaper. We did this analysis at Renew. It's undeniable. It's so much cheaper to heat with reverse cycle air conditioner than a gas heater. So keep that in mind, because a lot of people don't know that. Cooling appliances, it is getting hotter. We're getting hot days more often. We're getting hotter days more often. Cooling will be part of the new rental regulations, expected no longer in October 2025, but probably early 2026. Again, reverse cycle air conditioner, most effective form of cooling, and probably the most sensible one for a landlord to get if they're going to comply with both the regulations, because the one appliance complies with both the heating and the cooling regulations. These box air cons, it's actually the same technology as these, but they cost more to run because they're less efficient. And you often get like drafts around them. None of these comply with the new cooling requirement that's coming, because none of them are really higher than 2 stars. But some of them comply with the current heating requirement. But hopefully this is what people install. If you've got one of these coolers in your house, don't know if these will comply with the cooling requirements that are coming, because it's just not clear. These actually use a lot less electricity than these, but they use a heap of water, which can end up costing as much as you would pay for the more electricity use of this. And they're not as effective when it's humid. And one of the ways that our weather is changing is it's becoming more humid. So I don't recommend that people ever buy these if they're installing cooling in their house. If you've got one and it's your only form of cooling, well, that's your only form of cooling. But if you've got one of these as well, this is more effective than that for cooling in most cases. Places without cooling, I know some people use portable air conditioners. These are basically versions of those ones I talked about in the previous slide. These ones that you need to put water in are the same as those ones on the roof. And these ones that need a hose that goes outside are the same as the ones on your wall. They're relatively cheap to buy compared to installing one of those other things. They're less efficient. They're a bit noisier. They work okay. If you've got cooling, if you need cooling and you've got one of these, they're not the worst thing in the world. But hopefully when that cooling requirement comes in, it won't be necessary. General heating tips, especially if you've got, just heaters in certain rooms, close the doors and just heat the rooms that you're using. A heater designed for one room won't be enough to heat the whole house. If you've got ducted heating, though, you need to keep doors open so the heat can sort of circulate and return to the inlet. Otherwise, you'll actually get a draft that'll make you feel colder. In bathrooms, fan heaters or ducted heaters are not so good, because the moving air cools you, even if it's hot air. And when you're wet, you feel it more. So the best heating for bathroom is strip heaters like this, or if you've got these installed, those heat lamps, just make sure you remember to turn them off. They don't use that much electricity if they're on for 10 minutes, but if you leave them on all day, they do. So some sort of radiant heat is good for bathrooms. If you've got ceiling fans, they normally have a winter setting that actually helps to spread the heat around the room. So find the winter setting of your ceiling fans if you've got them, and use them when you're heating. Use them on low speed for that so that you don't get a draft. But they're quite effective at recirculating the warm air that tends to gather at the top of the room. If your heating's really ineffective, personal heating, in the end, it's your body that you need to keep warm. Heating the room is nice. Heating the body is important. You can get electric throw rugs. There's lots of options, small radiant heaters, especially if you're working from home in a cold room. Put warmer clothing on. Hot water bottles and wheat packs are also useful for personal heating. Be careful of the safety risks with these, though. Hot water bottles should be replaced every year because and you shouldn't use boiling water. You should put water in that's about 70 degrees. And wheat packs, follow the instructions. If you overheat them, they can catch fire. General cooling tips. Fans work pretty well. I've got one going now. They work on the same principle as the ceiling fans. And they work for the same reason that you shouldn't use a fan heater in a bathroom. The moving air makes you feel cooler, even if the air is warm. And combined with some cooling that you might have elsewhere in the house, if you've got it, they can help to circulate the air. So, portable fans like this, ceiling fans like this, and similar for heating, cooler rooms that you're using. Again, personal cooling. When it's really hot, spray yourself with water, damp tea towel, etc. And keep an eye on those indoor and outdoor temperatures. As soon as the air outside gets cooler, open them up and your house will cool down. Hot water. Basically, the stuff with heaters and coolers is the main thing for keeping comfortable. The hot water will help you save energy and leave you more money to buy more energy for your heating and cooling. And shorter showers save heaps because you're not only paying for the water, you're also paying for the energy to heat the water. Water-saving shower heads, very effective, and tenants are permitted to change to get efficient water-saving shower heads. Look up the Victoria Energy Upgrades program. You can often get them for free. I've got them at my place. They're great. They save a lot of water. They put my hot water bill down. Aerators on kitchen taps you can buy from the hardware store for a few dollars, and they work like a water-saving shower head for your tap. If you've got exposed hot water pipes outside the house and they're not insulated, for a start, that's against the building code. They're supposed to be insulated, but you can buy pipe insulation pretty cheaply from a hardware store and just wrap it around exposed pipes, and it'll keep the water hot in the pipes longer. My last place had lots of exposed hot water pipes that were not insulated. That made a considerable difference just to do that. So do recommend that if you've got that issue. Other stuff, just briefly, lighting used to be a big deal for energy efficiency. Now less so because LED lights are the sort of standard. If you don't have LED lights, get them. They use so much less energy than halogen or even compact fluorescent lights. Highly recommended. The very, very cheapest ones are a bit unreliable, as in some of them might wear out more quickly than others. But most of them last for a long time. Even the cheap ones generally last for quite a while. I just found a bit of a higher failure rate among cheaper ones than among slightly more expensive ones. But definitely recommend LED lights for anything. You can, if you've got those little ceiling lights, they're sometimes halogen. You can often get LED lights that just fit into the same sockets, but you'll need to check because not all of them can do that. And if you're buying appliances like fridges, washing machines, etc., look for the energy rating, and it's usually worth it to buy a more efficient one, even if it costs more money, because it uses less energy. And these little energy rating stickers, they normally have an amount on there that says how much electricity they use in a year. You can compare them to each other, and you can basically work out the difference in cost by multiplying that amount of energy by the amount that you pay for energy. And this little chart I use just shows that the blue bar is old appliances made before they had the energy rating system, which also introduced minimum standards. The orange one is the minimum standard, the minimum efficiency an appliance has to be allowed to be sold. And the grey one is how good sort of the top of the line most efficient ones are. And you can see in this chart for refrigeration, basically the lowest efficiency modern fridge uses half the electricity of an old fridge pre the energy rating system. And then a high efficiency fridge uses half less again. That's a huge difference when you can see the fridge is on all the time. So do recommend you look at those energy rating stickers for any appliances that you buy. And the last thing I wanted to touch on before we go to some of the resources is there's this whole solar scheme the Victorian Government has, and it includes a program for rental properties where it gives the owner of the house a discount plus an interest-free loan to put solar on rental properties, and the owner is responsible for the costs. The owner is not allowed to increase the rent or take money from the bond to cover the cost. There is an option for the owner and the tenant to agree for the tenant to make a co-contribution, which is up to, they've got a formula for working out. It's up to about $230 a year, which in pretty much every case will be less than the amount of electricity that you'll save by having solar panels. Always worth working it out though. If you're interested in getting solar on your rental property, speak to your landlord or property manager, tell them about this program. They might be interested. I've known some people who've done this and had a good outcome. Others, again, like I said, some people just don't really want to raise anything with their landlord because they just sort of want to keep a low profile. So it's really up to you to decide how you feel how approachable your landlord is. Anyway, that's the main stuff, but I'm now going to throw into some of the resources available, and Kelly is going to jump on to talk about what Hume Council is doing.
Thanks a lot, Dean. So from a Hume perspective, our main program is our home energy upgrades program. So this is open to homeowners and landlords in the city of Hume to upgrade to more efficient appliances. So reverse cycle aircon, heat pump hot water systems, induction cooktops, along with rooftop solar, and then to improve the thermal performance as well with insulation and draft proofing. So because these are fairly substantial works to a home, it is the property owner who needs to organise those improvements. So the way that they can get started, and you can relay this information to the property manager or the landlord if you have a direct relationship, or the real estate agent, that through the program, and the website is on the bottom there. Property owners in Hume can register to get free advice and no obligation quotes from suppliers that we've vetted for those 6 different upgrades. And there's assistance there for them to access relevant government rebates. So that solar one was already touched on, and there are some others that are relevant for rental properties. And we're keen to see some of those benefits, or as many of those benefits as we can, flow through to tenants. So where there's a long-term lease in place, there's additional council rebates on top of the Victorian Government rebates to reduce the upfront cost of the upgrades. And I wanted to mention the other things that are available to anyone in Hume, so certainly not a property owner, but at our libraries, we have a library of things. There's a portable induction cooktop you can try out and a thermal camera. I'll hand over to the next councillor to speak about their slides.
I think that's me. Yeah, so here at Merri-bek, we've got a number of different sort of offerings. Like Hume, we've got some resources to borrow from the library. So we've got induction cooktops available to loan. And we've also got thermal cameras as well. And as Dean pointed out earlier, thermal cameras are really great to identify sort of where the heat gain or loss is happening. But in addition to that, we've also got some efficiency kits as well, which includes a range of different things that you can test, sort of water flow rates of taps, but also the energy consumption of something like a fridge or a TV. We're also part of the Solar Savers program, which is a local government initiative that helps residents install a bunch of different upgrades that sort of Dean went over in his slide deck, namely around heating and cooling systems, solar PV systems, hot water heat pumps, and also batteries. And as well as we've also got financial support through a subsidy-based program where we support low-income households either to install a solar system or to get, thermal upgrades, which includes insulation and draft proofing. Now, this is available for renters who are on a low income. So the proviso is that both the landlord and the renter need to be able to agree to this. And the idea is that we pay the upfront cost of up to $3,000 for solar, or up to $2,000 for the installation and gap ceiling upgrade. And the idea is that we provide a service that sort of supports the customer throughout that whole entire journey. And we've also got links into the suppliers as well. So we've got preferred suppliers that we work with that. We've got some more info around all of our programs available on our website, which is zerocarbonmerri-bek.org.au, which is also in the chat. I think I'm also talking on the next slide as well, which is on behalf of Moonee Valley City Council. So, because they unfortunately aren't able to attend tonight, but one of the things that that Moonee Valley is doing is they're offering solar sharing assessments for owner corps in the Moonee Valley area. And the idea is that the state government have got considerable rebates that were mentioned earlier around solar for apartment blocks, which is a very different proposition than it is for a standalone house. And so what they're doing is they're offering how to sort of, I guess, get an assessment and a quotation process happening for those apartment blocks, because those applications need to go through at the owner's corp level. So they've got some free assessments and help for apartment owners. And like the other councils that spoke today, they've got environment kits where you can take home and borrow them. I will say that to be a library member, you don't necessarily have to live in the area. So sometimes it's really good to get memberships across all local government areas. A lot of the environment kits are really popular, and sometimes there's a wait list. So you might want to think about making sure that you're a member across a number of different local governments who often have the same kind of kits. And so therefore you got the best chance of actually getting to borrow one. And the last one that Moonee Valley have got as well is around their newsletter, and they've got lots of information around how they support households, including some announcements that are coming in 2025, which I believe. So they've also got their details there on how to sign up to their newsletter, and also their contact details on the general email address. And over to Yarra.
Thanks, Hugh, and thanks, Dean, for that really informative presentation. I'll just talk a little bit about the support that Yarra Council has available, which is very similar to what you've just heard from the other councils that are here tonight. So if you visit yarracity.vic.gov.au/all-electric-home, you can really navigate to all of the other websites that are listed here from that starting point. And that will take you to a lot of information about creating an all-electric home, a downloadable Go Electric action plan. And from there, you can also visit our websites about going solar. We're also part of Solar Savers. So as Hugh was mentioning it with Merri-bek, we also have partnered with Solar Savers to provide trusted advice and no obligation quotes for solar, electric heating, and heat pump hot water systems. We also have subscribed to the Sunspot Solar Calculator. So this tool is free to use for anyone, but if you're in the city of Yarra and you put in a Yarra address, you will also see additional features, including shading information. So if you're looking at where solar can go on your roof, that tool will help you to find out how much solar could fit on the roof and where the sunniest and shadiest spots, so to try and plan the best places for solar. And there's a lot of information on our website about solar for rental properties and in heritage overlays and in apartments. And we also have a library of things where you can borrow an induction cooktop to test it out. You can borrow an energy efficiency kit, and you can also borrow a thermal camera to find where your home is leaking heat or cool. And I'll also encourage you to sign up to Yarra Environment News to keep up to date about what's happening in Yarra. Tomorrow we have our website was going to be refreshed, so we'll have new information available on the website. And next week we're launching a couple of new pilot programs to provide subsidies to households where concession card holders are living, and that includes people living in rental properties. And those subsidies will be available for energy upgrades to improve the thermal comfort of your home or install solar, electric heating, heat pump, hot water systems, and so on. So please do check back to our website next week or sign up to Yarra Environment News to stay up to date on all of that. Thank you.
Thanks, Mel, and thanks, Hugh and Kelly, for that. I just want to recap a few of the other resources that I mentioned earlier in the presentation. The Victorian Energy Upgrades Program has got a bunch of stuff that you can get for free, like door snakes and draft sealing and shower heads. And they're moving to ban the door-to-door selling that those programs used to use, but you can still look on the VEU website and make an appointment for someone to come and do some of that stuff. So that's useful to know. I mentioned the compare.energy.vic.gov.au website, great for finding a cheaper energy bill. Look, the Your Home website, sort of aimed at homeowners, not renters, but it's got lots of really useful information about improving your efficiency, including some stuff that renters could use to make, especially if you're trying to do a bit of draft proofing or, do stuff with curtains or pelmets or sort of stuff that you can sort of do yourself and that you're permitted to do. So it's worth looking, and especially if you're interested in understanding more about the sort of thermal performance issue. And in a similar vein, the Getting Off Gas Toolkit that Renew's put out, again, sort of a bit more aimed at homeowners, but good information about appliances, gas versus electric, if you're interested in that. And look, that's pretty much it. I'm sure I've missed some stuff, so please do. I hope your questions are in the chat. I'll do some question answering now.
Thank you, Dean. Thanks so much for that presentation. And we have a bunch of questions that have come through. So our first one's particularly about what Victorian Government's doing. So we'll see if you can shed some light on that. In the past, the Department of Housing, so particularly social housing, has always exempted itself from residential tenancy legislation. The rules have been enforced on private rental providers, of course. So to what extent is the government extending these efficiency standards to its own existing social housing?
Interesting question. I mean, there have been some exemptions for social housing from some aspects of rental tenancy, but in general, social housing has been required to comply with a lot of rental laws, but there haven't been very many, really, especially around condition. As far as I know, the new ones apply to social housing and public housing as well as private rental. That'll probably be clear. As far as I know, they do, and I can't imagine why that would not be the case for the new ones. So that would be worth checking. But yeah, pretty sure that they already do apply the new standards that came out a couple of years ago, which is good news. And, I think there's been a lot of advocacy to the government for ensuring that, their housing stock is up to scratch and actually sets an example for other housing stock.
Thanks, Dean. The UK mandated double glazed windows back in 2002, and it even began to boom in popularity as far back as the 70s. The question is, why is it that Australia is so far behind every other developed nation in bringing construction standards up in line with those other countries? Do you think double glazed argon-filled windows will ever be mandated here?
I don't think they'll ever be mandated here. We just don't have as cold a climate as Europe, which is where they are standard. That said, the current building regulations, there's been a lot of uplift in building regulations in terms of thermal performance over the last few years. And the current one that's commencing this year pretty much incentivizes double glazing in areas with colder climates. In areas with hotter climates, they're a bit less effective and not necessarily the most cost-effective way to manage heat transfer. Like, in really hot climates, shading's more effective than double glazing. But in colder areas, you'll basically need to use double glazing to comply with the energy budget that you have to work with the new standards, unless you do a whole lot of other stuff. So, and the way our system is designed it's designed to not mandate any particular technology, but to mandate a performance expectation that then you need to use whatever approach is used to meet that. And there's some issues with houses meeting the standard. You know, a lot of people will tell you that, you know, a lot of houses don't really meet the standard because it's not strict enough. And that is true. But at the same time, if you look at data on energy usage, more recently built homes use a lot less energy than older homes. So even though the system's not perfect, it's sort of working. So I hope that answered your question.
And is there anything else you want to say in response to the first part of that question, which is why Australia is so far behind other nations with its construction standards?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I don't know. I think that construction standards have been more advanced in countries that have that are particularly cold climate, that have a lot of, you know, much more cold than we have. Europe is a good example. You know, construction standards in many other countries in warmer areas are also a bit more lax. So I think it might be partly climate. People are very cognizant of the health impacts of cold, more so than the health impacts of heat, I think. I think there's a growing awareness now of the health impacts of heat, which is one reason why the cooling requirement is coming to rental tenancies here. But yeah, look, it's a good question. I really don't know why, especially given that Australia is a country that tends to regulate a lot of things more than many other countries. But yeah, I think the big issue is, you know, we don't have, you know, ice and snow winters generally. And I think when the places that do, it's become a much more important issue for governments to move on than it has here.
Thanks. There's a person who says the rental has absolutely no insulation in the roof space. They contacted Merri-bek about the minimum standards, and to their shock, there were none. And this, I think, question was asked before you shared what's proposed. So if the minimum standards are brought in, how are they going to be policed? And a second question is, will mandatory scorecards be necessary for rentals and houses for sale? So that'll be sort of, you know, sometime.
Yeah, that's a couple of good questions actually. On the first one, I think insulation has proven to be a difficult thing for governments to feel confident acting on because of the big media storm that happened over the safety incidents that occurred with the free insulation program about 15 years ago. I was involved for many years lobbying the Victorian Government to bring in insulation as a standard, or even an insulation rebate program, you know, to give discounts for the energy upgrades. And they were all very nervous about, oh, you know, if bad things happen and it's a government program, then we get the flack. It's good to see them moving on from that. So I was very pleased to see the insulation standard coming in for rentals, and the government's also talking about adding it to the Victorian Energy Upgrade Scheme so that you'll be able to get a discount on insulation, and that'll make it much more achievable. The rule as it's proposed for rentals is only when there's no insulation. So personally, when I asked that question, you should be good. Compliance, I did mention a bit about compliance. The Victorian Government looks like it's moving to boost compliance a bit, but at the moment, it's really up to the tenant to sort of report the non-compliance. Consumer Affairs Victoria has provided an anonymous report mechanism, which I think is a help, because a lot of tenants don't want to, annoy their landlord. But if you can report it anonymously, that can help. I think when those changes do come in, it'll be easier. The new rule also for the house to be required to be compliant when it's advertised, that sort of shifts onus onto the owner and the property manager, and combined with the new forthcoming requirement for property managers and real estate staff to be licensed and trained, I think that should help with compliance a lot, because it'll end up being the onus on the estate agent to make sure that the houses comply. There's big fines if they don't. That does take some of the weight off tenants, and it's been too long to get to this point, but it's better late than never, I guess. The thing that's missing still is partial insulation, and a lot of houses have partial insulation. My house has partial insulation. They got most of the way, then they just gave up. That's not covered by the proposed new rule. I expect they'll ratchet it up over time, like they've done with the heating. They started out with a lower heating requirement, they're moving to a higher one. Certainly the Victorian Energy Minister is pretty keen on this topic. It's a bit of a pet project of her, a pet interest of hers. So, she's, a minister has to also convince the whole rest of the government to implement the stuff. So I'm pretty confident that changes will continue to happen. It'll happen at a pace that the government feels is politically not harmful, and that's a bit unpredictable.
Thanks. And the mandatory scorecard assessments, anything else for rentals? Yeah.
Yeah, look, there's been a big debate about the scorecard thing and whether you should assess the standards based on a scorecard assessment or based on the presence of certain things, like does it have insulation? Does it have a heater? When we first started pushing for these standards, we very much pushed for a scorecard approach. And the issue with the scorecard approach that was told to us was that it puts a flat bit of cost for everything to then comply. You have to get the scorecard thing to comply. And that is extra friction in the whole process, when in fact, some of these rental houses are so bad, you don't really need a scorecard to walk in and see what's wrong with them. You can see the holes in the walls. You can see there's no insulation in the roof. You can see there's no heater. And that was the argument used for what they call a features-based approach. And that's what the government's gone with. And in my view, that is the right approach, because we were, for example, dealing with a situation where about 25% of rentals did not have any heating at all. 50% did not have any insulation at all. You don't need a scorecard to make those improvements. I'm guessing that down the track, we will have the scorecard approach once the standard's been lifted up, but we're still at the stage of lifting the standard up. So I do think the features is probably a smoother way to get it in. And of course, once this has been in for a while, it just becomes the normal thing. And then no one makes a fuss about it, and it's just the done thing. And I think that's a good situation to then get a bit more nuance with like the scorecard and stuff like that. So I think it'll come in time.
Mm-hmm. And in an age where the world is striving for zero net carbon, why is a 2-star minimum energy rating on a home's main heating source allowed? Why not just make the minimum 4 or 5-star? Why are we setting the standards so low?
I can give you the inside goss on this one. The reason that 2 stars was chosen was because some of those cheap box air conditioners were 2 stars, and that was cheaper than buying a whole split system. That was a purely pragmatic thing that the Victorian Government did at the beginning of the standards. A lot of us oppose it, and we push for 3-star minimum specifically to not allow the box air conditioner as an option. Yeah. I don't know if they'll increase the standard. They should, but I also do think, given that they're bringing in the cooling requirement, none of those box air conditioners comply with the cooling requirement. 2.5 stars is the highest any of them go, and the cooling requirement's 3 stars. So any owner needing to comply with the cooling requirement is going to have to get a reverse cycle air conditioner anyway. And the cheapest way for them to do it will be to get one that heats and cools and comply with both. So I think it sort of shortcuts the need for, to have the highest star rating. And, there's a political sort of issue around over-regulation probably. So, yeah, look, I agree it should be at least 3 stars. There's an argument against it being too high because it's supposed to be a minimum standard and not like a, best practice. I'd like to see best practice personally, but, I understand the minimum standard thing. Yeah, that's the answer to that as far as I think.
Mm-hmm. And an attendee here says, I appreciate the cost-saving measure, but suggesting using curtains to keep the heat in or out just means we'll need to live in darkness. The responsibility should fall on the landlord, not the renter, to live in darkness to stay comfortable. If you have anything specific to respond to that, not an explicit question as such.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I mean, curtains are the most effective for a homeowner as well, unless you get double glazing, which is really actually not very cost effective as a retrofit. It's cost effective in a new home. It's not cost effective. It takes like 100 years to pay back the cost of installing double glazed windows in a perfectly good window space. It takes 100 years to pay back the cost by your reduced energy bills. If you're putting them in a new home when you're building it, or if your window already needs to be replaced, then the payback's about 15 years or something. It's still a lot. So, I don't think we'll see heaps of double glazed windows for a long time because they're mainly a thing in colder climates. And, in winter, it's usually a bit warmer when the sun's out. If the sun is out and you actually want to get sun in the house if there's sun in your windows, so you want the curtains open, and that helps. And I think most people generally find that the curtains closed at night and having some open during the day for the light usually makes a difference. But yeah, no, it's a fair comment, absolutely.
And a bit of an innovative one from other countries. So there are places where they've mandated that the energy companies need to upgrade the homes that they're providing energy to with things like double glazed argon-filled windows. Should we be doing the same here? After all, the ones who benefit from poly-insulated homes are the energy companies themselves.
Well, the Victorian Energy Upgrade Program, which I mentioned, and which is the people who used to come to your door with light globes and shower heads and that's how that program works. Energy retailers are required to achieve energy efficiency gains under a scheme called the Victorian Energy Efficiency Target. And they have to basically show that their customer base has improved energy efficiency by a certain amount. And the way that they do it is that they have these energy efficiency certificates that they have to submit to the government. They have to buy them, or they can produce them. If they do energy efficiency work themselves, they generate the certificates. If they don't do it, they have to buy them off someone who's doing it. So those people who come and do draft sealing and change your light globes and your shower roses and stuff like that, they are getting those energy efficiency certificates and they sell them to retailers who pay for them. So energy retailers already pay for that stuff. That's sort of how it works. It's designed so that they don't necessarily have to do it themselves, but they still have to pay for it, and they've got a target that they have to meet.
All right, thank you for that. And a question about how much gas people would expect to save if they were using a portable induction cooktop. So that's something that renters could readily do. Is that likely to make much of a difference?
To be honest, probably not a huge difference because cooking doesn't really use that much. Your other gas appliances use much more gas, like the heating and the hot water. You'll obviously save a bit of gas by using an induction cooktop, and you use a bit more electricity, but it's not really a big gas saving thing. The biggest difference using induction cooktop is if, and this is more of a thing for homeowners, I guess, is if a gas cooktop is your only gas appliance, then by closing the gas account and having an induction cooktop, you stop having to pay that daily charge to the gas company. You get the fixed charge on your gas bill. That's like, I don't know, 80 cents a day or $30 a month or something. When you end your gas connection, you don't have to pay that, which you otherwise had to pay no matter how little you're using. That's the way to save money by using induction. So if you've got no other gas appliances except for your stove, and if you actually terminate your gas account and use an induction, then you'll save real money on gas, because not only will you save the usage, you'll save the daily charge. But if you've got other gas appliances, then it's not really going to make that much difference. You still might like to do it because it's less emissions than using gas. And gas cooktops are also known for affecting the air quality inside the home. They've been linked to respiratory illnesses such as asthma. They're less safe than induction cooktops because they use an open flame, and fires can happen and stuff like that. So there are other reasons for using induction cooktop that might be worth it for you. So yeah, and it's good to try them out anyway, because if you end up moving into a house that has got an induction, it's good to have had the practice and know and be confident that it works for you. Because a lot of us in Victoria, we love our gas cooking so much. We don't like those old electric stoves that take forever to heat up and forever to cool down. And using induction is a good way to understand, this is different to those old electric ones, and it actually works as good as gas in terms of control over the heat, and better than gas in terms of easy to clean and less risk, and less, don't have that internal air issue. So that's a good reason for using induction. But yeah, you won't really save a significant amount of money on gas unless you're actually closing the gas connection.
Thanks for that. And I think probably a last one, but if there's anyone there who would like to have any last-ditch questions in the Q&A, do that right now. But especially with people renting, what should they prioritise if they're on a limited budget and don't have security of tenure, may not be able to live there a long time? What would you say are those top couple of things that they should prioritise?
Apart from the sort of way that you use the house, a bit like, closing the doors when you're heating and that sort of stuff, the priorities I would recommend, and the ones that I do, because I'm a renter, is make sure the curtains are good and have your own curtains, have your own thick curtains that you can hang up if you need to. And some draft stopping. Draft stopping's pretty easy to do yourself. Door snakes. Look, I've, technically probably not supposed to, but I've often sort of attached those little draft stopper things to the bottom of doors. Nobody ever notices that they're there. I can't really recommend it, but it's a good way to do it if you don't, if you don't want a door snake. That felt around doors, you can do that very easy. You can remove it when you leave. So yeah, some basic draft stopping, and definitely have some thick curtains that you can hang up if you need them, because curtains make the biggest difference. And I do recommend, like that bubble wrap trick that I showed the photo of, I poo-pooed that for years, so I thought, how ugly and awful. But when I finally tried it, I was amazed by what a difference it made. So if you've got a window that you're not crazy about looking out of, or that you want some privacy because it, it faces another house window, like I've got them all down one side, the bubble wrap is great for that. It costs nothing or very little, and actually works really well. And it's a good solution for that question before. We want to get the light in, but we want to treat the windows. So, because I've got that on a few windows, and so even on a cold day, I've got the curtains open, so I'm letting a bit more heat out, but the bubble wrap is stopping it from being too much. And then when it starts to get darker, close the curtain, you add to the effect. So yeah, they're the things I recommend.
Thanks a lot for that. That's the end of the questions that have been put forward. Just a reminder to people, do make use of the links that have been shared in the chat. There's a real wealth of resources from Renew and also from the councils, and there'll be a short feedback survey for you shortly after the session ends. But I think, that is all from us, and people can get 6 minutes back prior to our finish time. But thanks again, Dean. That was really great presentation, and it gives us all something to work with in rental properties.
Great, thank you, and thanks everyone for coming.